Good evening. I have another class of the Professor 219 formula for how to be a conservative and survive in today's messed up America. You don't need to know my real name. Last time we discussed the public health risks and public health impact of LGBTQ lifestyles, and I'd like to briefly revisit that topic. I got some feedback, of course. If you know your statistics, and I do, you can effortlessly crush counter-arguments to what I proposed. For example, HIV. We've had 42 years of safe sex education, and still, by far, the largest group of new cases of HIV comes from the LGBTQ community. It's overwhelming. With one disease, the lifetime medical costs are $400,000. You are never going to recover $400,000 in health insurance premiums from one person, particularly if that person has a life expectancy of 40. People in medieval Europe had a life expectancy longer than 40, and they had to deal with the Black Plague and the 100 Years' War and the Crusades and the Mongols. Okay? A life expectancy of 40 is worse than medieval. But that's what the LGBTQ community has to deal with. And we have to deal with paying their medical bills after they're dead, because we pay health insurance too. 750,000 people in the United States have died of AIDS. Another 1.2 million are living with HIV, and they will eventually die from it. That's 2 million people at $400,000 each. That's $800 billion. That's the budget of the Department of Defense. Okay? For $40 billion, we could have 2 armed security guards and a metal detector at the front door of every school in the country, all 130,000 of them. We could have a chain link fence around the entire property. We could have doors elsewhere in the building that only open outward, locked from the inside, and will only unlock when the fire alarm goes off. For $80 billion, we could throw in a second entrance for any school with more than 1,000 students, and 2 armed security guards and a metal detector at that entrance. If you go up to $120 billion, we could start arming teachers. Any teacher who takes a gun safety class and gets a concealed carry permit and carries a loaded firearm, wears it all day, every day when school is in session and at sporting events and other after-school events or weekend events, gets a tax-free bonus of $10,000. You know, teachers have been complaining that they're underpaid, and they are. I like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So let's pay the teachers more and make our children at least as safe as the typical deputy traffic court clerk in a courthouse. Courthouses have been secured for 20 years in precisely the same way. Once we start acting as though our children's lives are at least as valuable as the lives of traffic court clerks, school shootings will end. I'm just trying to illustrate how much money $800 billion is. $800 billion would cover the costs of everything I've talked about for 5 or 6 years. Mass shootings in schools would be over. But no, that makes too much sense. We have to get our priorities straight as a nation. We have to address actual safety risks and reduce them or eliminate them. Who's talking about the costs of the LGBTQ lifestyle in terms of healthcare costs? Dr. Anthony Fauci is not a bacteriologist, he's not a virologist, he's not an immunologist, he's an epidemiologist. He specializes in studying and in understanding and explaining the spread of diseases. What does he have to say about this? Nothing. None of the experts have anything to say about this. It's up to you and me to say something about this and to ask questions. Ask tough questions. And it isn't just AIDS. Hepatitis C has the same healthcare costs as a case of AIDS. And many members of the LGBT community have both diseases. Then there's an entire cornucopia of gastrointestinal diseases that are extremely rare in the heterosexual community, but widespread in the LGBTQ community. Nobody talks about these. You have to dig. You have to search. You have to know how to spell the names of these diseases: shigellosis, giardiasis, amoebiasis, campylobacteriosis. And then run your Google search. You'll find everything you need to win an argument. But nobody wants to talk about it. At least none of the experts. They're all focused on COVID and monkeypox and trying to reduce the stigma of monkeypox as it is applied to the LGBTQ community, which is 95% of the current outbreak of monkeypox. The other 5% are people who have had close, intimate contact with members of the LGBTQ community. I could just go on and on about this. I mean, I've already spent an additional 8 minutes on it. I grow weary. Need to stay hydrated. Let's talk about inflation. Let's talk about the price of fuel. The policy of the Biden administration and the Democratic Party is to just let the price of anything based on fossil fuels go wild, just go through the roof and into orbit. They refuse to take responsibility for this, however. They claim that the rise in prices of fuel is not Biden's fault. They always find somebody else to blame, like Vladimir Putin. But when the price of gasoline started to come down a little bit during the course of the summer, Biden and the Democrats were quick to take credit for it. This is one of their signature moves. If anything good happens, take the credit for it, Democrats. If anything bad happens, find somebody else to blame it on. The only reason the price of gas has come down is because we're importing more of it. We're importing more oil from countries like Saudi Arabia. Norway and Great Britain have a lot of offshore drilling rigs in the North Sea. So does Denmark. we're importing more oil. And some of those countries don't have the same environmental protections on their oil industries that we have on ours. But the Democrats don't care because it's not being drilled here. They want to make us more dependent upon foreign oil and the political and terrorism risks that come with it. When you're filling up your car or your pickup truck at the gas pump, do you want to be funding a terrorist organization that's going to be murdering American exchange students overseas? No, you don't. You would rather that money go into the pockets of Americans in the United States. So would I. The solution to inflation is to A, reduce the price of fuel to what it was on Election Day 2020, under $2 per gallon of gasoline, under $2 per gallon of diesel fuel. And because transportation costs impact the price of almost everything else, inflation is going to go down too. Give you an example of how inflation is impacting the entire civilized, industrialized world. Great Britain's largest public employees union is their doctors and nurses, because in Great Britain all health care is nationalized. They have a national health service rather than individual hospitals and clinics and doctors' offices running as small businesses or medium-sized businesses. They just have one big government agency with over 100,000 employees. Doctors and nurses. X-ray technicians. They've offered this public employees union an annual raise that is less than the published rate of inflation. As we all know, the published rate of inflation is lower than actual inflation. Nobody's really experiencing only an 8.5% inflation rate. Nobody. It's 10%, 12%, or even higher. So the Biden administration redefines the word recession. The minute it looks like we're going to have a second consecutive quarter of GDP decline, which is the traditional definition of the start of a recession. You know, if we redefine the word recession, a lot of the recessions that have been blamed on Republicans in the past 50 or 60 years didn't exist. And the left-wing media propaganda machine is actually starting to balk and chuckle at this redefinition of inflation and redefinition of recession. When the Democratic Party has lost the left-wing propaganda machine, the Democratic Party has lost. That's about all for now. Please give me a thumbs up and comment below. Subscribe to my channel and share this video on Facebook and wherever else you choose, Twitter. I don't know whether anybody will be swayed or will change their minds about voting for the Democrats if they see this video, but I hope they do. Have a good evening.